Hello, Dr. D, and my fellow classmates. My name is Shivani Rajwar, and I am a graduate student here at Amberton University. For our graduate research project on global mobility program, I will be focusing on India. We will be looking at different cultures in India, different work culture in India, and also how expat or expatriate might be comfortable moving into culture of India and working there. Okay, as talking about my topic here that we will be discussing for this graduate research project, as I mentioned earlier, we will be looking at differences in work environment, basically in the US and in India. We will also be looking at few factors that has to be considered by human resource management for a greater global mobility. For those of you who haven't seen the map of India, this here is the map of India. Before we start, I wanted to give you a little introduction about India. India is a country in South Asia. It is the seventh largest country by area and second largest by population. It is the home to the Indus Valley civilization, and India is known for three major world religions which originated in there. It's Hinduism, Jainism, and Sikhism. India got its independence on August 15th, 1947. For those of you wondering what that is, it was the day when Indians got liberated from the rule of the British. As we can see in the 21st century, India has excelled a lot technologically and even scientifically, but no surprise, agriculture is still the dominant occupation of the people in India, and it is one of the most important economic sector for the country. Also, the roots of Indian culture and civilization can be traced back to more than 5,000 years ago. Amongst the world's oldest, richest, and most diverse cultures, India represents an amazing confluence of different creeds, religions, faiths, and belief systems. There are 22 major languages in India written in 13 different scripts with over 720 dialects. And believe it or not, the official language of India is both Hindi and English. Here on, since we are in a management of global workforce class, I thought about looking at the working culture in India. The business culture of India is a reflection of the various norms and standards followed by its people. Indians have various cultural yardsticks which extend to their business culture as well. Thus, it is really important that a person visiting the country as an idea of the business culture of India. Having a good grasp on Indian business culture will ensure that you succeed in maintaining a well-earned affinity with your business counterparts. Now, let's look at some work culture in India, some general work culture in India. Sound knowledge of India's cultural practices and business etiquettes is a must for any trade or business venture. A proper understanding of culture and business etiquette would not only demonstrate a respect for the country, but it will also create a feel good factor amongst the prospective clients, as I mentioned earlier, I guess. And next thing is the business culture of India is a reflection of various norms and standards followed by its people, as I mentioned earlier. One of the very important factor in most of the South Asian countries, including India, is the way people greet each other. The namaste. The namaste is an important part of Indian etiquette and is generally used while greeting and saying goodbye at even in personal life or at work as well. One very important factor about the culture of India that we need to understand is their hospitality. They really like to take care of their guests. As you see on the point here, guests are treated with utmost respect and courtesy. International travelers, businessmen, they can expect to enjoy the Indian hospitality. At the same time, culturally, as a mark of politeness, Indians have a difficulty saying no to anything, which might be a stumbling block in negotiations and in closing contracts, as we are talking about global business here. And one more important thing, companies follow the hierarchy system, and decision making is usually from top to the bottom. Uh, it could be a little time consuming, but I have seen a lot of international companies so respect to this. The lack of infrastructure and inadequate supply chain management can also act as a bottleneck for foreign investment. But overall, as we see here, this is the general Indian culture. Now let's look at some work culture in India in office environment, like what a typical office environment is and what are the different aspects of being an employee in an office, in a global office in India. The first and the foremost thing that we need to know about Indian work culture is the notion of time, time management, punctuality is still an anathema in India. It is more to do with the mindset and that is ingrained in the Indian culture. It would not be surprising if meetings are postponed, rescheduled, cancelled, or even at some instances, meeting will be organized at a very short notice. Another important thing about the office environment of India, bureaucratic hurdles and a laid back approach to work in the government circles, which often result in delays in processing, overload of paperwork, and a general lack of confidence in the system. Therefore, I would say to be working in an office environment in India, if you are dealing with like government circles, it is very important to have a lot of patience. And like I said earlier, it's top to bottom hierarchy system in almost all organizations in India. And as you might see in my slides here, at the end of every slide, I have the reference listed for you guys so that you can see, and I have the reference page at the end of my presentation as well. Next up, let's look at some more office environment in work culture in India. Like I said earlier, people do not adhere to the timings, and I talked about earlier about meeting getting cancelled, rescheduled, meeting happening in short notice. So when I talk about timings, let's say people have to go meet clients at a certain time for lunch or dinner, these kind of stuff to it's not really punctual and it's not really organized, and people tend to people tend to show up really late to these kind of meetings as well. And as I said, meetings get postponed. And one more important thing is extensions are often requested. As trust me, as hardworking as most of the Indians I have come across, I have seen this last minute thing, and they have this habit of waiting till the end, I guess. And extensions in projects have been repeatedly asked. We have I have seen few instances, and I did go through a few research studies here that I found, which had experiences of people that had to go through this. Another very important factor, I think this is one of the most important factor about the office environment or the work culture in India. Main thing is people, most of the Indians think workplace as an opportunity to build their future and put forth extensive efforts to climb the corporate ladder. There's no work-life balance. In Western work culture, however, we have seen they give more value to time spent for their personal life. They do not carry the workplace pressures or stress at home. Nevertheless, they stay back at office and work occasionally. But in India, they tend to uh, take work way seriously, and they tend to try to complete everything on time, which creates a pressure in them, I guess, and they cannot create a balance between their life and work. Continuing on to some more work culture in India. One most important thing is the difference in the relationship between boss and subordinates, or boss and the employees, let's say. The relationship between a boss and subordinate is really close and personal. People in power, they openly seem to display their ranks according to which importance is given. Most of the employees, they're not supposed to expect clear guidance from the managers, and they are often not even assigned with important work. Subordinates are expected to take the blame for things that go wrong as well in certain instances. One of the very important factor in any global organization, or for that matter in any organization, is mentoring and criticism and assessment. But Indian work culture seems to be lagging a little bit on this sector as well. In mentoring, Indian managers are a bit soft in critical assessment. That might be because they don't want to look bad, they don't want to look bad or present themselves in a certain way in front of their employees, but it has been a basic thing in India, in Indian work culture. Another important thing is seniors tend to lean more on positive feedback during an appraisal, leaving the criticism unsaid. It is very important when you are criticizing someone. Constructive criticism is very important when you're criticizing someone. You have to go towards both the positive and negative of a person. But seniors working, like Indian seniors working in our culture in India, they tend to leave the negative feedback behind and just focus on the positive of any employee. Moving on, let's look at some more work culture in India in an office environment. Next up, a very important thing is about change. I think change is vital in any company, may it be global or not global, may it be in a country like America or may it be in a country like India. But with India, is what the people are like in our culture is they do not accept change easily. A lot of resistance is encountered in order to implement change. And I don't know if this is too important, but the typical workday in India is 6 days a week instead of the normal 5 days a week that we have in the United States, which I think gives them a lot more burden and less time to relax and come back to work on a Monday like we do. Okay, these are some more cultures in it. Now let's move on to this experience of an expatriate who worked in India for a little while. I found this really relevant because I thought it is important to look at when we're talking about working in an Indian culture. It's important to look at how an expatriate who will be going to a different country and working there, adjusting there in that culture, there might be some basic factors that he might have trouble with. There might be basic challenges that he might be facing which we don't consider important, but at the end of the day these basic factors make up the work environment, and these matter a lot on how the person adjusts to the work environment. So I have this small interview that I came across, I would like to share with you guys. And as we go along, I will explain to you what his experience were. As I said, it's really simple, but it does make a lot of sense to me. So let's see. This one is conducted by Ranjini Manian. She's the founder CEO of Global Adjustment, and she interviewed James, who worked in an Indian company as an expatriate, managing a team of 10 Indians aged anywhere from 25 to 40, and reported to the managing director of the India operations. This does provide a good example of how people from other culture have difficulty adjusting to the Indian work culture. Okay, now let's see what the challenges were that James faced as an expatriate. The first thing titled here is Talking the Talk. James, before he went to India, he had been assured that Indians were well versed in English and communication would not be a problem, which I believe is true because English is one of the primary languages spoken in India, and I have seen most of the people very fluent in English. It's just the way people use the language, which is a little bit different, that might be important for an expatriate to get used to, not just in India, in any country the same language might be spoken in a very different way. So it is very important to understand how they talk. For example, with James, whenever he had a telephone conversation, that was the part he had trouble with. People started taking his call, and the first thing they said instead of hello was tell me. And that kind of, threw him back because he was used to hearing hello. So that's one thing he has mentioned in his interview about how the talk was different, even though in the same language. Another important factor that James came across, a challenge as for him, is following the trail. As the picture suggests here, email chain is the main thing here James is talking about. Uh, Communication by email was quite a problem for him. What happened was he kept getting long email chains from his team with terse messages in the latest mail asking him to read through the trail and respond to some point or other. He had to go through reams of material and pick out the point that needed his attention. And then there was the issue of copying people on emails. James' mailbox was clogged with emails from one team member to another, which had no relevance to him but which he had been copied on. He found this quite annoying. Another of James' experience here in India while he was working there as an expatriate. Who's the boss? That was the biggest confusion that Indians had. Protocol was another issue which he came across. For one thing, his team addressed him as Mr. James, which he found really odd. But in Indian culture, using Mr. as a term of respect, they tend to attach a suffix to your name, like Mr., Mrs., Miss, which is a form of respect rather. Though James found that people often jumped the line as well, even though there was an order in the way they worked. When someone felt that a matter needed quick attention, they would simply contact a senior person, even in another country, by passing direct superiors. He found this habit a little bit too tough to tolerate. Okay, continuing on to James' experience here, let's look at a few more. One more thing he had problem with was the clockwork. Okay, the main problem with clockwork was the problem of time management. James found his colleagues were very intelligent, hardworking, perhaps a little too hardworking. They worked long at the office, much beyond office hours. While sometimes he asked for reports of work done, he got it in a minute detail down to the last nanosecond, which was really tough for him to deal with because mm, how it works in the US is you get a certain report you ask for and that's what you get. Instead, he was getting everything in a long format, which took a lot of his time and patience. Okay, up till now we looked at the work culture in India, and we also looked at an expatriate experience, an interview of an expatriate. We had these basic issues. Now I thought about looking at some similarities between the two cultures in the US and in India. One of the basic similarities that I came across, I realized, as a matter of fact, is both the countries, India and the US, are multicultural. India has a lot of different cultures. From within the country, they have culture uh, and subculture within the country. They have cultures coming from out of the country. And in the U.S., as we all already know, it's known as the melting pot. There are a lot of cultures, people from different countries already living in the U.S. Another very important factor that I came across is the political system of both the countries. Both the countries have a deeply ingrained democratic culture. The US is the world's oldest democracy, while India is the world's largest democracy. And both the countries were former British colonies. US came into independence a lot earlier than India, though. That was back in 1776 as compared to 1947 for the Indians. Okay, another factor that has the same similarity between the two cultures is the in entrepreneurship. Both the countries love to take risks to create wealth and new businesses. I have seen like people from both the countries, they like to start new businesses, be entrepreneurs, And although US is way ahead in entrepreneurship than India, but India is definitely catching up. One very important factor about the people of both the countries is their quest for knowledge, encouragement, and open debate and dissent. I've seen both the Indians and Americans have a strong desire to gain more knowledge into anything they learn, and they always encourage debating. Okay, now let's look at IBM India. You guys might be thinking, why IBM India in the middle of all these cultural differences? This is just an example I wanted to give of a company here which is pretty huge in the US and also in India, and how these cultures, how this office culture is affecting the company. Okay, a little facts about IBM. The world's largest information technology company in terms of revenue is IBM with 88 billion in 2000. IBM products include hardware and software for a line of business servers, storage products, custom designed microchips, and application software. Talking about IBM India, IBM India Private Limited is the Indian subsidiary of IBM with its headquarters in Bangalore, Karnataka. Talking about IBM India again, it is the second largest private sector employer in the country with over 100,000 people enrolled. The company has spread its business operations to various parts of the country. They have 14 different offices in different cities of India, and it offers customized solutions in the field of software development. The great facilities and services offered by the company has made it a trusted name in the field of Indian IT industry. Let's look at what CEO Jeannie Rometty has to say about IBM India. She is the CEO of IBM, and she visits India. She has visited India quite a few times, and she has big things to say about India and IBM in India. That's why I wanted to kind of give you an overview of a company which was doing great globally and which is doing really great in Indian market. That's why it was really important for us to look at the culture of India, work culture of India. Okay, IBM chairman and CEO Virginia Romney says the 21st century will belong to India. And that's a direct quote I took from one of her interviews. She said IBM has done a study on India 6 months ago in which over 1,000 people participated. It clearly demonstrated India's potential. Rometty, on a visit for the second time in 6 months, said India would be at the center of the fourth technology shift that she refers to as the cognitive era. Cognitive era is very, very popular in IBM right now, where they plan to work with artificial intelligence, and India is believed to be one of the major technology shift that's going to happen in this era. Okay, since we're talking about IBM and IBM India, let's look at some human resource management practices in IBM, which they practice for greater global mobility from around 2000, from the year 2000. Okay, in 2000, the CEO of IBM was Sam Palmisano, and at that period of time during 2000, they adopted skills inventories or competency based systems to provide a kind of common language against which many aspects of the talent management system could be directed. So it was mostly based on competency and skill inventories. In 2003, however, Randy McDonald, the chief human resource officer for IBM Corporation, recommended IBM executives that they embark on workforce management initiative, which is known as WMI. WMI mostly looked at working with resource management, talent and mobility, at the same time learning for all their employees, and also maintaining a balance in supplier or vendor management. Continuing on, some more HRM, human resource management practices in IBM. Okay, what this WMI did, it was a great deal of day-to-day work involving the workforce management, and most of the work resided with managers, team leaders, and employees. Division of expertise what was potentially more expensive. And WMI, one more thing it did was it limited the kind of flexibility needed by a more dynamic and globally integrated organization as IBM, because it most of the power rested upon the high level managers and team leads. Okay, since we looked at uh, all the work culture in India, also looked at a few experiences from my expatriate and similarities and differences in the culture, and also looked at a significant company in India, which is a global company with its parent company in the United States, IBM India, and its progress. I believe it's very important we look at a global mobility program. Uh, which provides inclusion based on culture if you're planning to spread your wings as a global company in India. Once an organization has successfully modified their recruitment and hiring practices to reach a more diverse audience, I think the next step is to successfully engage and support them as employees. Learn about the cultural backgrounds, lives, and interests of employees outside of workplace. Building relationships through increased understanding and trust helps to foster this inclusion. An inclusion environment requires both individual diversity awareness skills and effective organizational systems that support diversity and inclusion. Let's look at a few suggestions I came up with for a global mobility program in India. First and foremost, a very important thing is effective cross cultural training programs. These days, the demand for effective training programs in cross-cultural communication has exploded, with a driven desire to prevent misunderstanding and to boost corporate competitiveness in the global marketplace. Um, some important factors to think about when conducting a cross-cultural training program would be the commitment to improving internal and external cross-cultural communications must become part of the company's culture and apply to everyone equally from the CEO down. It has to be a culture that has to be adopted not just by the employees but from the higher managers to each and every employee of the company. Okay, there are a lot of programs that exist which offer little or more than etiquette training, such as whether you should bow or shake your hands. But what these do is they fail to address deeper issues that impact communication. So it is really important that these training programs address invisible and subtle differences between people of different cultures. Trainings must be more strategic in nature because strategy is important in any global business or global organization. Next up, standard corporate culture. It is important the core values, the core challenges to um, keep the corporate culture alive in a company in a different host country. So it is important that we define what constitutes appropriate workplace behavior and reinforce that code of conduct in every location, may it be India or any other Asian country or European country, anywhere it is important to have that uh, understanding of what the corporate cultural is looking at. Okay, it is also important to take a more homegrown internal approach to building cultural awareness. Also, it is important for company leaders to commit to treating every employee, customer, and client with respect and should define what that means. Using no racial terms, jokes, or language, even if such conduct is legally permissible in a particular country. It is very important to draw a line as to what is allowed and what is not, because some culture might treat the same thing much more differently than others. So it is very important to understand what is permitted in a particular country and what is not. What might be considered a joke might be something offensive in a different country. So it is very important for company leaders and employees to understand the culture of the place they are going to have a mm, company. Like in India, if they have a company, they need to uh, know the boundary. They need to know where to set the boundaries. Okay, and most importantly, and most easy thing to do, it is important for everyone to practice common courtesy. Another thing is the people of the company. May it be in India or may it be in any different country, people are what make the company. We need to treat them as an asset and a challenge. We should consider employees as asset and allocate expense on them as investment because, as I said earlier, they are the one who make the company. Also, keep in mind people from different geographies. It is also important to provide incentives to encourage work productivity because without incentives, people tend to slack. They don't, team to they don't seem to put in so much work and so much energy into work. So it is always important in any work environment to provide incentives to encourage people. And also it is very important these days, everybody wants to put forth their opinions about every little fact. So it is important to provide opportunities for to the employees in different countries to put forward their opinions because opinions might be different about the same thing in different cultures. And another thing that is very important is empowering local organization. This is especially important for a global company because it is almost impossible for the host country and the CEOs and the executives in the host country to take care of the global subsidiaries all around in the globe. Okay, what we should do in empowering local organization is make subsidiary head a senior officer and part of global executive committee. Also, providing subsidiary-based CEO with own investment budget and autonomy for most day-to-day decisions is important because with that power that they have uh, to decide on a day-to-day basis, they feel like they are important to the company, and at the same time the bigger companies don't have to, the bigger CEOs and everybody don't have to be worried about each and everything every day. Okay, also important is to assign a business development team to scout for opportunities in the host country periodically. Okay, with all that, we looked at the work culture in India, similarities between the US and Indian culture. We also looked at a few experiences faced by an expatriate. We looked at a company, IBM, which is doing big in India and in the US, and how their HRM practices are. And we looked at our little global mobility program. Okay. In conclusion, this conclusion is based on what I have seen in Indian culture and what is a better global mobility program that should be created to work in a country like India. Global companies venturing or existing in India should keep in mind that the country drives on its rich culture. Culture is what drives the people, so it is very important to know their culture and respect their culture. For countries like India, human resource management of a company should focus mainly on the people and culture they are working with and create a global mobility plan that incorporates their culture. And at the same time, it is very important that they don't forget the core values and goals of an organization. And for expatriates, I am focusing on expatriates even towards the end of this presentation because it is very important these days because we see a lot of people going to different culture in different countries. It is very important in this case to understand a culture before they get into the working zone and also be courteous and understand the foreign culture they are getting into. Okay, and here are all the references I have for this presentation. Okay, that concludes my presentation here. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. And if you have any concerns, any criticisms, please go ahead. I would be really pleased to listen to your opinions. Thank you so much for listening again.